We are here today to learn how to take all of your LinkedIn content, whether it's content that you have in LinkedIn posts or content that you have in comments, all of your activity on LinkedIn, and turn it into a podcast. Because if you're already putting in all this work and you already have all this expertise and you already have all this heart, you might as well have more people learn about it. So today, I am so excited. We're joined here by Kobi Omenaka. He is an expert podcast producer and strategist. And when people need help with their podcasts or getting started and managing and everything, he is the guy. So Kobi, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you so much for inviting me, Brooke. I've been
Yeah.
watching your content for the longest time, so it's amazing to be on this channel.
Awesome. And by the way, guys, for those watching, go ahead and feel free to share, where are you joining us from? Obviously, what part of the country or the world? And also, any questions you have or comments, anything, share them in the comments section, share them in the chat. And because I want to make this as interactive as possible for all of us. So, okay, so let's do this first of all. So, Kobi, for those of us who don't know Stripped Media, can you tell us a little bit more about it and what's your day like as a podcast strategist and producer? What does that look like?
All right, yeah. So Strip Media happened after making my third podcast. My first podcast was all about digital marketing. That's my kind of bread and butter side of things. And I used that podcast as a way to get to know people in digital marketing within London, which is where I moved to and had no kind of connections. And it was a great way to connect with people. Then my second podcast was all about film and TV, which is a fun show, which is a really fun show, and it's got like 400 episodes. And then the third podcast, see what happens is when you start with a podcast, you might start making more than one. My third podcast is called The Wire Stripped, and that's the first podcast I had, which then started to have like quite a big audience. And my friends, the co-host and producer on that, we decided to make a company around that kind of idea. So The Wire Stripped became Stripped Media, and then we kind of pivoted around into making podcasts on film and TV, but also podcasts for personal branding and business as well.
Oh, fantastic. So I'm sure you get obviously a lot of people who say, I want to start a podcast. Okay. So
Yeah.
what is the first thing you would ask them to do before they just like buy an expensive mic or something like that?
I would say, do you know who that podcast is going to be for? And two things, yeah. Do you know who that podcast is going to be for?
Yeah.
And also, don't think about just the podcast, about the first episode. Think about the 50th episode, because it's going to be a journey to get your podcast out there and running. Think about what it's going to be like to get to a 50th episode. Like 90% of podcasts die after the first like 8 episodes.
Really?
So I'd love you to make sure. Yeah, it's a super high attrition rate. So I'd love to make sure that you're set up to be getting to the 99.9% of podcasts that have ever been in the world.
So,
and when you start to think about the 50th episode, then you start to think a bit more like, okay, after the first one goes live, what's there for the second one? What's there for the third one? And you just a bit more planning becomes a foundational part of making the podcast.
right. So, okay. So I will tell you that you saying about the attrition rate, like how high it is, and like what you said, like the 8th episode. So what typically happens in that time frame that is causing a lot of people to drop off? And then what do you do to avoid that being in that drop off?
Well, being not, looking ahead and thinking and knowing that, this can happen. A lot of podcasters come into it thinking, it's just going to be straightforward and I'll be able to do it week by week and it's all fine.
Yeah.
It's a genuine thing called pod fade. So if you Google pod fade, it's a well-known phenomenon that happens. But largely it's because people start the shows with all the good intentions and then realize that it does take a lot of work to keep it motoring and keep it running. And that's just being recognizing that is a true fact. And that's why I said about thinking for your 50th episode. If you're not thinking one by one, but thinking 50 ahead, then you already have a better foundation, better kind of structure around you when you're making your shows.
Gotcha. Okay. So, one question I wonder if you get is the format. Like, should it be a solo? Should it be an interview? Should it be co-hosted? What would you recommend? And again, just assume that the audience is we're starter podcasters.
Sure.
We don't know anything.
I think it needs to depend on you, and
Yeah.
that's a great part of the conversation we have with people is because sometimes company come to us and say we want a podcast, and they might say they want to be the host, which is great, or they want to get another host in. Some especially businesses will have a bit of money and they want to reach out to like a celebrity host guest type person so they can get some credibility straight away. But broadly, solo podcasts are easier to make sure you're doing it week by week because it's just one person. You're not having to account for the people. I mean, your YouTube channel, for example, if you had to if you did it with someone else week by week, just logistically scheduling that time adds a lot of extra complexity that people don't think about. So that's something that you generally have to think about. But the other side is my podcast, which has 400 plus episodes. I've had a co-host and the same co-host from the start, and we keep each other accountable. So we keep each other like motoring on as well. So there is the kind of like camaraderie piece that keep you going on as well. So those are a couple of things to think about, really. With business podcasts, one benefit is having a guest on your show, because then you reach into their audience, and that's a huge benefit especially when you got LinkedIn, for example. When you post the episode and post it live, then you tag them in the posts, and they're likely to share it. So it does help with you getting more and more views on your podcast. So if you are interested in that, it's a great way. It's a great thing to have guests on it because they help to share the show to their audience, and it makes your job way easier on that respect.
Gotcha. Well, one thing I've heard, and maybe it's incorrect, is let's say you're running your business and you want to have a podcast to again be to show yourself and your thought leadership kind of thing. If you have, let's say, but if most of your podcast, let's say, is guests, does that chip away your own credibility? I mean, obviously, I know I'm totally not a podcast expert whatsoever. It's like, okay, Kobi, you're, but is there a little bit of a danger there also to having guests?
I don't think so, because I don't feel that's the case, because people will get to know and love and trust you over the course of the episodes.
Okay.
So, over 5 episodes, people get to know you in ways that they wouldn't beforehand. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. I'd say just a couple of things though. If you do have guests, there's no need to grandstand and show off that you know everything. It's more about you helping to guide a conversation. If there's subtle opportunities to show your expertise in those chats, then do so. But make it more about 80% about them, 20% about yourself in each episode.
Yeah. I've been the guest, I will say. I've been the guest on some interviews, and you interviewed me and you were great. I've been on some others where it felt like I was just there to cheer on the host. I'm like, okay, I guess this is the deal. And it doesn't make that person feel so special because, they're fragile and so I get it. So, okay. So let's say you decide, okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the podcast. And let's say you're going to make it a solo thing just from a logistic standpoint. And, and you really brought up a good point about that. I hadn't thought about the fact that it's easier to do logistics solo than with, 2 people. But okay, let's say you're going to start it and you've already been on LinkedIn and, whether you're posting a lot or maybe you're just commenting a lot, but you're putting a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah.
How do you know which of the stuff you're talking about would be good for a podcast?
I think there's many sources for what makes a good podcast, and LinkedIn's a great one because you can get that really quick feedback from people.
Yeah.
And from when you get posts. I mean, there's the algorithmic side of like, does it hit or miss? But when you have a post that hits or a comment that hits, that is often a great source for an episode or even a season or a series of your podcast. And what's really good about the LinkedIn side of things is that people are honest, and you can lean into that for the episode. Yeah. People are honest. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I mean, in terms of the reactions,
Yes.
to your content. Yes, I thought you meant like, yeah, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
In terms of their,
I'm jaded.
In terms of their own like self-made content or posts, maybe. But in terms of if they comment on your post, if they comment or feedback on your comments, they will give you your thoughts. There might be a few AI generated ones or bot ones, but you'll be able to quickly tell which are the
Yeah.
genuine what's the genuine feedback.
Got it. And and how would you recommend that people keep track of that? Like in their, but even if they have to have daily, whether it's on LinkedIn or their daily interactions with clients or whatever it is, like, is there a is there a way to kind of like track that information that you recommend to clients?
I've started using this tool called Obsidian, which is just it's a note tracking tool. But anything will do. So Notes app or Evernote, for example, are useful. I think if you are in that mode of like, okay, how can I pivot this conversation into, or this comment or this post into something more valuable or into a podcast,
Yeah.
then have a pen and paper ready, have your Notes app ready, have a way of keeping that alive. If, maybe copy and paste the link into a spreadsheet and say, okay, this, maybe I should come back to this tomorrow and work out what episode this could be, or what topic this could be, how I can spin this out.
Gotcha. That sounds really good.
And also,
Go ahead.
and just also with that, try and use the people's words within the thumbnail or within the description of the episodes, because that might be what made it resonate.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And one thing is interesting that you mentioned, apps that you use, because one thing I've noticed in your LinkedIn content is you talk a lot about, oh, just try this app, or I just build an app, or so like but like you definitely lean into technology, which I'm sure helps with podcasts, but it probably helps with everything that you're doing. So,
With life.
yeah, I mean, even just inviting people to this live stream, you created an app. I know we're getting off the topic. We're taking a slight detour from podcast, but we'll cut back to podcast in just a second, guys. But you actually did a post about how you created an app to automatically invite a lot of people, but in a kosher way, to this event. So that was really, really cool. Okay, sorry, I had to like bring that up because that was just like, that was above and beyond. That was so awesome. Okay, so let's say, so someone, now they have their podcast, and they have their topics, and they're and it's whatever format they decide. What tips do you give to people to make sure that podcast really encourages returning viewers and also becomes binge worthy?
That's the $1 million question. So part of that, a big part of that is knowing your audience, and knowing who they are. A great thing with LinkedIn is if you've had a series of posts that have really worked well, then that could be the backbone for the content. And that's where I say about using the words in their comments as the way to make sure that they feel that they're being seen and heard, is a really good way to go. Scrolling through the feed and go, oh yeah, that's exactly how I would say that challenge, or that's exactly how I would describe it. That helps people to hook in like straight away. Easier to grasp tricks would be things like when you launch your podcast, try and have 3 episodes in there right at the start, so people know that there's more coming and they can get to know and like you better. Because if you just launch 1 episode, then you're not back for a week. It's quite easy to forget, right? So it's easy to subscribe when people have heard a bunch of you and think, oh, I like these people, I like you, let's subscribe. Sound, try and make your sound as clear as possible.
Yes. Yes.
It's hard when you listen to a podcast and you just like, this hurts my ears. As much as the content might be good, if it hurts people to actually listen to it and absorb it, then for all the will in the world, people are just going to pivot away.
Let's keep talking about that with the sound, because video is fairly easy to edit. Maybe it's just too dark, you can make it a little lighter, maybe you can add some saturation. But sound, there's only it's a lot trickier to edit, and sometimes there's only so much you can do without hiring like a super professional sound editor. So what are things you recommend that people do to help control the sound? It really is overlooked by a lot of people, and it is one of the most important things.
Yeah, the first thing is you don't need to spend that much money to make the sound sound great. So if one benefit of being a solo podcaster is you can really get a good sound from just your phone microphone. So you might already have the kit that you need to start with that straight away. So if you're a solo podcaster, climb under your bed sheet, record there. I should say if you're not recording the video, certainly. But if you're just recording audio, climb on your bed sheet, and you can do that, and the sound will sound great. A lot of the mistakes that people make are buying the wrong type of microphone. So there's a type called a condenser microphone and a type called I don't want to go too much into the technical side of things, but there's two main broad types of microphone. One requires that you are in a studio to make it sound great. One is a lot more forgiving, and means that you can be in like a less treated room. So I always err on the dynamic ones, which like this, or I can give you another example of ones which are a bit less sensitive, but means that it doesn't pick up like a fly buzzing around the corner, or it doesn't pick up the echo in the same way. So yeah, your microphone choice at the start can be really helpful when you're doing that.
Okay, so the one that's more forgiving, is that called dynamic, or was that your
That's
just
correct. Yeah,
it's called
yeah,
dynamic. Okay, because it's more just helpful to know which one to kind of look for. Okay, that's helpful. I didn't know that. So, and that's after doing lots of videos. But it would be funny if you did a podcast and there is actually video, and you're underneath your sheets. You're like, don't tell anyone in my house I'm doing this podcast, but welcome to the 100th episode.
I'm sure it's been done somewhere.
I think that'd be awesome. So, all right. So, what about episode length?
Episode length is another question that is maybe not $1 million question, but I get asked that all the time.
Yeah.
And I'd say, as a effusive podcast listener, the longer the better. But as someone who started their show, I would say make it tight and concise, because it's still quite a big task to get people to listen to your show in the first place. So if you can get everything you want across in like 15-20 minutes, then make it 15-20 minutes. And then when people look at your feed at the start and they say, oh, the podcast is 20 minutes, that's fine, I can listen to that whenever. Versus if they see it for the first time and they're looking and it's an hour, it's a bit more of a, I don't want to do that right now. But for me, that doesn't matter. But I need to acknowledge, and I do acknowledge, that it is harder for some people. People do judge whether to listen to an episode by how long it is.
Right.
So short and tight makes sense until you get. I think once you start getting, one podcast I make at the moment is about 30 minutes long, and the main feedback they're getting is, I wish it was longer. So now we're starting to think, okay, let's make it longer to make sure we're filling those details. So I think let your audience start shorter, let your audience guide you. If they start telling you, could it be longer, then that's maybe a time to start thinking about making it longer, or giving bonus bits, in separate sections. Yeah.
Gotcha. So, two questions I have. Let's talk about bonus bits. What do you mean by that?
So have you ever listened to a podcast and they've said, join our Patreon to get extra bonus bits?
That's what you mean by that. Okay, got it. Okay, okay, that makes sense. I just never took that step, but okay. But it always sounded good. It always sounded, I'm like, yeah, I would like that, and then I just don't do it. So, but there are some smart people who do it. And then the other question I have is, okay, so you made a really good point about, okay, let's start off smaller, because you really have to prove that you're putting good stuff out there, and then people want to listen to more and more. Suppose you have a really good topic. What would still make your episode boring?
If you don't edit it to cut out the dead spaces, and this matters more from a YouTube perspective. So you can tag him that kind of comment. But sometimes you can transform an episode by cutting out 10 seconds, and cutting out the right 10 seconds helps to really add some dynamic nature to the episode, and just keeps it propelling forward. So you don't often need to cut out a lot, but if you know where to edit and remove things, and that can really be super helpful.
Gotcha.
And you don't need to necessarily cause out pauses where people are thinking. Because I think sometimes when you can feel people ruminating, that adds a bit of like anticipation to it.
Yes.
to the episode. But yeah, if you could work out where to cut out the right 10 seconds, really helps with the show.
And is that something that, for example, you guys would do at Stripped Media? Is it something that you teach your clients to do? Like, how does that? If someone's like, "What do you mean? Like, how do I get rid of these?" What would you recommend?
So we edit podcasts a lot, so that's
Yeah.
a core part of it is stripping it down
Hmm.
so that the story and the story of the episode is really clear. And sometimes it might be moving around a bit that they initially recorded at the end and move that to the front or into the middle. But yeah, that's a huge part of what we do, is making sure that it's as tight and as propulsive as possible.
Gotcha. Do you ever find that some people are, how they talk naturally and then they get on a podcast and they just become almost like a robot? Not a total AI robot, but do you think, does that sometimes affect how they're received, and what do you
Yeah,
recommend?
are you talking about for the hosts or for the guests? Because I guess there's two kind of different answers.
Let's say the host, because we're talking about the people who would be doing, running the podcast.
Yeah, that's one of the key questions when I ask when they come to me and say and they say, "Hey, I'd love to have a podcast," and one of the first questions, as I said earlier, is who's going to be the host, because that will dictate a lot of the style of it, or a lot of how we're going to edit around it, the kind of music that's going to accompany it. All that will all feed into each other. If the host their intonation isn't as engaging, I'm trying to think of a polite way to say it, then that's something you could definitely cut around with, and maybe use like stings, like audio stings in between to help like spark up the keep the flow going a bit. So you might just have a quick, like in radio you would have what they call like 5-10 second audio stings, just to when people go from one conversation strand to the next, for example. So things like that, adding these little sound bites helps chug things along.
Got it. What do you mean by audio stinks? I'm sorry. I think I'm not. Wait.
So an audio sting. So when you listen to a show, a radio show or podcast, you might have just like a little. So, for example, one podcast I edit is called Ultimate Football Heroes Podcast. It's a kids podcast based on these books. So these are very clearly like football books for football, soccer. If you guys are from that part of the world,
we're good. We understand that the rest of the world calls it football, and we're the odd ones out. Yep.
So that's a kids show, and when the hosts go from one segment to the next, I interject it with like a little shout of sometimes kids screaming, just going, "Yay!"
Yay!
Like that.
Oh, okay.
It's like a segue to that, or there might be like a shout of an audience like applauding a goal, So that kind of thing just helps to move things along. Or if the guests do a obviously bad joke on purpose, I might do a wah 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 in there.
Yeah. So. Okay. So I guess I would think of it as the word sound effects, but I didn't realize there was an actual like word for a term for this. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And by the way, for those of you watching, if you have any questions, because I'm a beginner with all of this, so feel free to ask in the comments, definitely. But one thing that I'm sure one reason why people probably would want to do a podcast too is they want to make money from it. So what are some realistic expectations people should have around monetizing a podcast? Like, does it happen? What does it look like? When does it not happen?
It 100% does happen, but it doesn't necessarily happen in the way that everyone thinks it does. So what that means is the standard route that people think about making a podcast is they start the show and they get tens of thousands of listeners and they get money through sponsorship.
Yeah.
And that happens to so few podcasts. So I'm not to say that it wouldn't happen for your show, but that's not the way that it happens for most podcasts. If you run a business podcast, one of the best ways to monetize is to use it as a source of content or tie it in with your other channels, such as LinkedIn. Use it to build that trust, so that becomes like a lead magnet. So for me, an amazing way the podcast my first podcast make me a lot of money was I invited guests on to my podcast who then in the weeks and months later were like, hey, Kobe, we've got a project. Can you work with us on this project? So inadvertently, it became a lead magnet. And then once I realized that, then other podcasts I've had and I've worked with other clients, a big part of the strategy is to make sure that we're inviting their ICP, their ideal customers, onto the podcast to get to know and like and trust. So they get to know them in an intimate way, which builds that trust. And that's a huge way to then generate revenue from your podcast, because it then becomes a lead source. It becomes a funnel, a part of your funnel of getting people into your show.
Gotcha.
And into your ecosystem.
And also
So
that makes, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Go
ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm just slight delay.
Yeah. Well, at least we're both thinking at the same time. So, but
Yeah.
What was I going to say? I do love the idea of, what you're saying is two different channels can kind of work together. And I will tell you that's been my experience with YouTube and LinkedIn. I haven't done much YouTube lately because I've been so busy, but the two work together. And I'm really glad to hear that's been your experience as well. The other thing is that there are 1 billion plus people on LinkedIn, but there aren't 1 billion people having a podcast. So while there is competition in whatever niche someone's in, I imagine, in the podcast world, it's less than it is on LinkedIn. So maybe it's easier to kind of grab that audience and they find you and then track you whenever social media you're on. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely funnel people each way. So at the end of each podcast episode, have a clear call to action. And your LinkedIn post where it's one way you want to drive people somewhere, make sure you have a clear call to action to your podcast, for example, so they can super feed the other. Yeah, 100%.
Gotcha. And one thing that I noticed when I spoke on your podcast was that you were fantastic at repurposing that content, like really, really good. Are there suggestions you have for that?
So I love having the kind of single source of truth for content. And when I'm putting out podcasts related to things I talk about on LinkedIn, I definitely mine that as a resource. It makes it way easier for me. It might take longer. It might take as long to create like those assets or the content. But if I know that when I had a conversation with yourself, I was like, okay, I'm going to speak with Brooke about YouTube and I'm going to make sure that I'll make 5+ different bits of content from this. And that makes it easy for me to create them and write them and feed them out, versus that kind of, the worst thing in the world is having that blank piece of paper, that blank screen with a cursor like flashing.
Yes.
And saying like, essentially, now what, Kobe? What are we going to write about?
Exactly.
So having that podcast episode is a source. And that's why, and then in reverse on LinkedIn, if you have a post that pops and hits, then that's also a source for going back to it for the podcast way. Or if someone puts some really great insight in your to a comment, then that's also a source or a source of inspiration for it.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. A lot of times people will say something in the comments of your own post that you really need to pay. It's more than just replying to those comments and saying thank you, but like read what they're saying, because there's some gold there. So are there any other platforms that you like using beyond beyond LinkedIn and obviously your podcast, like that you recommend, and what does it look like in terms of multiplying all that content on your end?
So there's 3 other channels which I'm not using anywhere near. Well, one I haven't started using yet, anywhere near as much as possible. So one would be YouTube, which is 100% where I want to spend more time, and I've recorded some bits, and I look to you for advice on that side of things.
You can ask me at any time. So yeah.
And Reddit, I spend a lot of time on Reddit, and it's a great source. I use Reddit for a lot of source of my inspiration for my LinkedIn posts. I'll be on a growth marketers subreddit, and someone asks a really good question. I'm like, oh, that's actually awesome. And then you see the comments that people add to those Reddit posts, and you see, again, the real ways that people ask those questions, the real ways that people are struggling with those points. And that is a huge mine for me and it's been a source of quite a lot of my viral posts, because I've tapped in and I'm using the words that people are using on Reddit, and I've just very little editing. That's the hook of the post on LinkedIn, and that then becomes the source of everything else going down. And then the last one, so yeah, YouTube and Reddit, I'm on those already, and need to be better at those, or more consistent, I should say. Then the last one I want to go on is Substack, and repurposing again the content I'm putting on LinkedIn onto Substack and working out how that works. So I feel that there's an opportunity there which isn't fully being realized by myself or by a lot of people.
A lot of people. And Substack, I mean, it's newer compared to, the others. What do you like about Substack? Again, we're doing a detour. I think is important though.
I like the way it's a bit more blue ocean in that there's less competition there. So a key analogy I have for this is when TikTok started, then if you were happy to post on TikTok, then you'd get a lot more traction. You'd get a lot more engagement now because they needed people to generate content on there. So it favors you more than the other platforms do at the moment. And it's the same way with LinkedIn. If you started posting on LinkedIn 4 years ago versus now, if I was posting the same content on LinkedIn 4 years ago, then it would get a lot more attention than now, where it's a lot more saturated as a market than it was 4 years ago. So all these platforms want people to stay on those platforms. So if you're making content, then it will help show your content to other people. So, and that's where I feel Substack is at the moment.
Gotcha. Yeah, there are benefits to being an early adopter. I mean, you are also seeing like the growing pains of it, but you also get more attention. So definitely. Was there anything I should have asked you that I did not ask you, or things you want to point out to people?
Just one thing tying in with those other pieces with the platforms. I'm doing a lot with AI at the moment and trying to understand how it works, because I think no way you spin it, whichever way you spin it, it's going to be some part of our lives going forward. So I'm like just trying to play nice with it rather than be resistant to go, don't hate AI. And my post today on LinkedIn actually talks about, okay, the places that AI, that ChatGPT, etc., gets its sources from. Number one is Reddit. Number two is LinkedIn. A bit further down that list is YouTube. So being on these places does help to give you more visibility going forward. And I still don't think AI and ChatGPT, etc., have fully worked out how they're going to surface that content. But if you're posting on those channels, or you're active in those channels, then that should have multiplier effects outwards as AI becomes more and more part of our lives going forward.
Perfect. Thank you. And in the description for this video, everyone, I did put Kobi's LinkedIn profile so you can connect with him or reach out or follow him, and then also the Strip Media website. Are those hopefully the best ways to reach you, or is there another link you want me to put in there after this?
I'm on LinkedIn all the time. Oh, sorry, an additional piece which I think is useful is we also talk about starting your own podcast, and that's great. But a big win I've had with a few people recently, or a lot of people recently, is being a guest on other people's podcasts.
Yes.
And you can do that more strategically. And that takes away a lot of the pain of what microphone do I use? How do I post it out there? If you're reaching out to people and being a guest in their shows, then they do a lot of the legwork for you. And then they'll share you with their audience. And it's a great way to get started. It's a great way to get used to speaking in front of a microphone. It's a great way to engage and get used to podcasting generally before you may or may not decide to segue onto your own show.
Exactly.
So that's something we help a lot of people out with, is podcast guesting as a service.
That's huge. I've gotten at least a couple clients from being a guest on someone else's podcast. So that was and with small audiences, because you just don't know. So that's completely that's a really good point. So anyway. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone watching did too. And yes, everyone, please reach out to Kobi. He is just a wealth of knowledge. He also has really great LinkedIn posts, so definitely, at the very least, follow him on LinkedIn. And all right. Well, thank you very much.